Even the emperor feared the human princess's next move. High above the sprawling city, the imperial palace stood like a monument of stone and crystal, stretching into the sky with towers that seemed impossible to climb. The air buzzed with tension, for today was the day the human princess, Lysara, would make her entrance into the empire. Her arrival had been the talk of every district, every spaceport, and every council chamber for weeks. Some whispered with curiosity, others with fear. No one expected a human to hold the influence she was rumored to bring. Within the palace, the corridors gleamed under the cold, artificial lights. Guards moved silently along the walls, their multi-jointed limbs clicking softly on the polished floors. Courtiers in flowing robes adjusted their ornaments nervously. The emperor, Zarinthos III, sat upon his throne in the central hall, his many eyes narrowing as his advisors flurried around him. For centuries, the Zarinthian Empire had maintained order through discipline, strict hierarchy, and careful manipulation. Nothing in its long history had ever truly challenged the emperor's control. Until now, Lysara's ship descended slowly through the city's outer layers. Unlike the sleek, angular vessels of the Zarinthians, her craft had smooth curves, a simplicity that spoke of a different kind of intelligence. Those who saw it whispered among themselves. The human princess had arrived, and she came without an army, without a show of force. That more than anything unsettled those who prided themselves on power and intimidation. Inside the palace, Lysara disembarked. She was tall, but not unnaturally so, with hair that shimmered like sunlight and eyes that seemed to measure everything in their calm, unwavering gaze. She moved through the halls with a grace that betrayed no fear, yet suggested a quiet confidence that unsettled even seasoned diplomats. The guards and attendants watched her, unsure whether to admire or distrust her. There was something about her that made even the oldest Zarinthians pause. The emperor observed from his throne. His many eyes flicked from the princess to his council and back again. He had seen many dignitaries, many rulers, many conquerors, but never someone like this. She did not tremble in his presence. She did not bend. She did not bow as expected. Instead, she approached with measured steps, her head held high and her hands relaxed at her sides. The emperor felt a strange tension coil in his chest. "Princess Lysara of Earth," he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber, "welcome to the Zarinthian Empire. We hear much of your world. Tell me what brings you to my domain." Lysara's voice was steady and clear, carrying through the hall without hesitation. "I come to understand, to learn, and to offer dialogue between our people. I do not seek war, but I will not shrink from what is necessary to protect my world and my people." A murmur ran through the audience. The words were not bold or threatening, but the clarity and conviction behind them were unusual. In the Zarinthian courts, even the simplest statements were often clouded with layers of meaning, manipulation, or veiled threats. Lysara spoke plainly, and yet her presence carried a weight that left the emperor uneasy. He decided to test her. The emperor was known for his subtle and cruel ways, often setting traps for visitors to reveal weakness or deception. Today would be no different. "Your words are honorable, princess," he said, a slight curl to his mandibles betraying his amusement. "But can you navigate the complexities of empire? Can a human mind comprehend the intricacies of Zarinthian politics and power? Or are you merely a symbol, a fragile creature in a world that moves faster than your species has ever known?" Lysara's gaze did not waver. She stepped closer to the throne, letting the ambient light play across her face, and smiled faintly. "Every mind has limits," she replied calmly, "but understanding is not impossible. It only requires patience, attention, and the willingness to act when the right moment arrives." The emperor felt a flicker of unease. Few beings had ever answered him so directly without fear. Even the bravest Zarinthians, trained for diplomacy and intrigue since birth, would have faltered under his scrutiny. Yet Lysara seemed unshakable. Her words carried a quiet power that no weapon could match. Throughout the ceremony, advisors and generals tested her. They offered challenges in logic, riddles of law, and moral dilemmas designed to expose ignorance or arrogance. Time and again, Lysara navigated the trials with precision. When confronted with a question about resource allocation among provinces, she suggested solutions that combined fairness with efficiency. When asked to interpret a legal precedent, she offered insights that revealed both clarity and respect for tradition. Each answer was simple in its explanation but profound in its understanding. By the end of the day, whispers filled the palace corridors. Humans were supposed to be fragile. Humans were supposed to be naive. And yet, here was a human who could command attention, who could inspire thought, who could shift perspectives simply through presence and reason. The emperor felt the weight of centuries of unbroken control pressing against him. For the first time in his long life, he considered the possibility that someone could outmaneuver him, not with armies, but with intellect and influence. Outside the palace, citizens and visitors watched the events unfold via projections in the city squares. The image of the human princess stood tall on the screens, calm and dignified. Many had never seen a human in person before. They had expected a small, timid creature, fragile and insignificant. Instead, they saw a figure radiating confidence, poise, and intelligence. Among the crowd, some began to murmur hope. Perhaps humans were not as weak as they had been told. Perhaps they were capable of more than anyone had believed. The palace advisors moved quickly behind closed doors. Plans were whispered and strategies recalculated. The generals debated the meaning of her words, their voices tight with unease. Even loyal ministers began to question whether the balance of power had shifted. The emperor, for all his experience and cunning, felt an unfamiliar sensation: doubt. He had built an empire on certainty and control, yet Lysara had arrived and, with a few words and gestures, begun to unsettle everything he knew. Lysara, meanwhile, observed the palace carefully. She noticed the subtleties, the slight tremor in a general's limb, the hesitation in a minister's voice, the hidden glances exchanged between advisors. Each observation added pieces to her understanding of the empire's inner workings. She did not act hastily, she did not boast. She simply watched, learned, and planned. Every moment she spent in the palace was a chance to see the patterns of power, the weaknesses hidden beneath layers of authority and tradition. That evening, as the twin moons of the Zarinthian system rose above the horizon, Lysara stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the metropolis glimmered like stars mirrored on the ground. In that quiet moment, she allowed herself a small smile. She had arrived with nothing but her mind, her courage, and her people's hopes behind her. Yet already she had begun to make an impression. Already she had demonstrated that humanity was not to be underestimated. The emperor watched her from a distance, his many eyes narrowing. Even from across the palace, he could feel the strength in her presence. His advisors had failed to predict her actions. His tests had not revealed weakness. And now he understood a simple truth: this human princess was more dangerous than any army. Not because she sought war, but because she could change the hearts and minds of those who served him. For the first time in his reign, the emperor wondered what Lysara might do next. And for the first time in many centuries, he felt fear. The morning sun of the Zarinthian system painted the imperial palace in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, the corridors hummed with the energy of activity, as ministers, advisors, and generals hurried to attend their duties. Yet, amidst all the order and discipline, a new presence had begun to unsettle the rhythm of the palace: Princess Lysara of Earth. She moved quietly through the halls, observing everything. Every glance, every hesitation, every whispered conversation offered her clues about the workings of the empire. The Zarinthians prided themselves on control, but even the most disciplined beings had weaknesses. People whispered about her everywhere she went, wondering how a human could understand them so quickly, how she could predict reactions with such accuracy. Lysara was not naive. She knew that every action she took, every word she spoke would be scrutinized. Yet she also understood that humans had a gift that many other species lacked: the ability to see beyond immediate fear and focus on opportunity. Where the Zarinthians saw threats, she saw possibilities. Her first task was subtle: to understand the military and political structure of the empire. Zarinthian generals were proud and rigid, bound by centuries of tradition. They were trained to follow orders without question, yet each had their own ambitions, their own rivalries. Lysara listened, asked simple questions, and let conversations flow naturally. She never pressured, never insulted. Instead, she gave the impression of curiosity, of genuine interest in understanding the empire. It was during one such discussion that she noticed a general, Marthak, fidgeting with his robes and avoiding direct eye contact. Something about his movements hinted at unease. "You seem concerned," she said softly. "What troubles you?" The general hesitated. Then, perhaps because of her calm tone, perhaps because he was intrigued by her presence, he spoke. "It is nothing for a human to understand, Princess. The Empire is strong, our forces are unmatched." Lysara tilted her head. "Yet even strong empires have cracks. I only wish to learn not to expose them unnecessarily." Her words were not threatening. They were simply truthful. And in that honesty, the general found himself responding with more openness than he had ever done with his peers. For the first time, someone was listening without judgment, without hierarchy. And in that moment, Lysara began planting the seeds of influence. Meanwhile, in the Emperor's chambers, reports came in continuously. Every day, news of Lysara's subtle maneuvers reached him. Ministers who had been loyal without question were reconsidering advice. Generals who had never dared to question orders were now speaking cautiously in meetings. The Emperor's unease grew. This human, with no army and no formal power, was reshaping his empire simply by moving among its people. Lysara also observed the palace itself. She noticed the hidden corridors, the guard rotations, the meetings conducted in secret. Every detail helped her understand not just the structure of power, but the flow of influence. Humans had a natural advantage in adaptability. Where Zarinthians relied on strict routines and hierarchy, she used creativity and observation to find opportunities that others overlooked. Her first real test came during a council meeting. The Emperor had summoned her to witness discussions on the allocation of resources to the outer provinces. These regions were often neglected, and disputes over food, energy, and labor were common. Many expected her to remain silent, to observe without interference. But Lysara spoke. She suggested strategies that balanced efficiency with fairness, methods that improved productivity while also gaining the loyalty of the populace. The council members were astonished. No one had expected a human to understand their systems well enough to propose workable solutions. Generals exchanged wary glances. Ministers whispered among themselves. The Emperor's multiple eyes narrowed as he listened. Lysara's suggestions were simple, yet effective. They demonstrated not just intelligence, but vision and empathy, qualities that were rare, even among the most skilled Zarinthians. As days passed, her influence grew quietly but steadily. Soldiers began to admire her insight, finding her ideas practical and logical. Citizens in the districts she visited spoke of her fairness and clarity. Even some members of the court, who had once regarded humans as insignificant, began to reconsider. It was not power or intimidation that she wielded. It was understanding, and that understanding allowed her to navigate a web of intrigue and ambition with ease. One evening, as the twin moons rose in the Zarinthian sky, Lysara met with a small group of generals who had begun to trust her judgment. She did not command them, nor did she demand loyalty. She simply spoke of strategy, of the need to think beyond tradition, and of the value of human creativity. Slowly, the generals began to see that her ideas offered solutions to problems that had long seemed unsolvable. "Your methods are unusual," one general admitted cautiously. "We have always relied on structure, on hierarchy. Your approach is different." "That is true," Lysara replied, her voice calm and even. "But different does not mean wrong. Sometimes it takes seeing things from another perspective to solve what has been considered impossible." Her words carried weight. She did not challenge the Emperor directly, but by inspiring those around her, she began to shift the balance of influence subtly. The Zarinthians were proud and clever, but they often lacked the adaptability and creativity that humans brought naturally. Lysara had recognized this and was using it quietly, methodically. Not everyone was pleased. Some members of the court plotted in secret, hoping to undermine her influence. They spread rumors and sought to entrap her in mistakes. Yet Lysara anticipated many of these moves. She never acted hastily, never reacted with anger. Instead, she observed, learned, and adjusted her approach. By the time her opponents realized the depth of her understanding, she had already moved several steps ahead. The Emperor watched all of this with growing concern. For weeks, he had attempted to understand her, to predict her actions. Yet every attempt seemed to fall short. He had always ruled by fear, by force, and by knowledge of his subjects' weaknesses. Lysara had none of these tools in the conventional sense, and yet she commanded attention, loyalty, and respect in ways that were unfamiliar and unsettling. Late one night, he summoned his advisors to discuss her influence. "She moves like a shadow," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Everywhere we try to control, she is already there. Every division we plan to command, she finds a way to influence. Even our generals begin to see her as a guide rather than a subordinate. How can this be?" A senior minister, careful with his words, replied, "She is not like any human we have known, Your Majesty. She observes, she listens, and she acts when the time is right. Perhaps it is the human mind itself, flexible, unpredictable, capable of seeing patterns others miss." The emperor's eyes glinted with a mixture of admiration and fear. If this human is allowed to grow unchecked, she could change the entire empire. Even now, I feel the shift. Meanwhile, Lysara continued her work, unaware of the full extent of the emperor's concern. She focused on understanding the needs of the empire's people, both high and low. She visited outer districts, listened to the concerns of workers, and spoke with scholars and artisans. Her presence inspired hope, a feeling rarely seen in a society so ruled by fear. People began to believe that change was possible, that perhaps the empire could be guided by intelligence and fairness rather than strict control and intimidation. One afternoon, she observed a dispute among the palace guards. Two units had clashed over a minor protocol disagreement, and tempers flared. Instead of reprimanding them harshly, she mediated. She listened to both sides, pointed out logical errors, and suggested compromises that satisfied both parties. By the end of the encounter, the soldiers respected her not just for her fairness, but for her ability to understand their concerns. These small victories accumulated. With each problem she solved, each relationship she built, Lysara strengthened her position. She did not need armies, fleets, or weapons. Her power came from the same place as all great leaders: insight, courage, and the ability to inspire others to act with intelligence and honor. Word of her successes eventually reached the outer reaches of the empire. Ambassadors from distant systems reported on her diplomacy, generals spoke of her strategic insights, and citizens shared stories of her fairness and wisdom. The name Lysara became synonymous with competence, courage, and hope. Even those who had doubted her began to see the truth. Humans were not weak, and this human princess was extraordinary. The emperor, however, remained uneasy. He had faced rebellions, invaders, and traitors before, yet none had approached power in this way. Lysara's influence was not immediate or violent. It was quiet, subtle, and unstoppable. Every move she made seemed calculated, every word chosen carefully, yet always genuine. The emperor understood, with a growing chill in his many hearts, that she was not merely a visitor or a political curiosity. She was a force that could reshape the empire itself. And so, the human princess continued her careful work, moving through the empire like a quiet storm. She observed, she learned, and she acted with precision. She formed alliances where none were expected, solved problems that had persisted for decades, and inspired loyalty without coercion. Every day, she demonstrated that humanity had something the galaxy often underestimated: the ability to adapt, to think creatively, and to inspire others toward greatness. By the end of Part 2, the palace was no longer the same. The generals, ministers, and citizens had all begun to sense the change. Even the emperor, the most feared ruler in the galaxy, could feel it deep within his instincts. The human princess was no ordinary visitor. She was a strategist, a diplomat, and a force of human ingenuity. And everyone, from the lowliest citizen to the mightiest ruler, wondered what she would do next. The palace corridors had never felt more alive. The air buzzed with quiet tension as ministers and generals moved with new awareness. Whispers of the human princess, Lysara, filled the halls. Everyone had begun to notice a change, subtle but undeniable. Those who once believed humans were weak were now reconsidering. Even the emperor, seated upon his grand throne, felt the weight of her presence in ways he could not fully control. The emperor had spent countless nights observing her, attempting to predict her next moves, but every strategy he devised was met with unexpected precision. Lysara did not act with force, she acted with insight. She did not intimidate, she inspired. The emperor, a ruler who had toppled foes with armies and political cunning, realized that for the first time, there was a force beyond his command that could challenge him in ways he had never imagined. Determined to assert his authority, the emperor devised a plan. He would test her openly in front of the entire council. The trial was to be a demonstration of his power, a spectacle designed to humiliate the human and show that no one, no matter how clever, could challenge him. The council chamber was prepared for the event, a massive hall filled with towering columns, shimmering banners, and hundreds of officials and observers. When Lysara entered the chamber, she did not bow excessively or flinch. She moved with calm grace, her gaze steady. The emperor watched her from his elevated throne, noting the composure in every movement. "Princess of Earth," he intoned, his voice echoing through the hall, "today you will demonstrate your understanding of governance and loyalty. Show us that humans can match the wisdom of Zarinthians, or admit your place among us as a visitor, nothing more." Lysara's reply was quiet, yet carried across the room with clarity. "I do not seek to claim wisdom beyond my understanding," she said. "I seek only to offer perspective and insight, to show that even those considered outsiders can contribute to the good of all." The trial began with a series of challenges. Advisors presented complex scenarios, questions of trade, diplomacy, and security, designed to expose gaps in her knowledge. Generals spoke of battles that required nuanced strategy. Ministers posed dilemmas of law and loyalty that had taken Zarinthians years to resolve. Yet Lysara navigated each one with remarkable clarity. When confronted with a border dispute between two provinces, she proposed a solution that balanced fairness and strategic advantage. When asked to assess a trade imbalance with an allied system, she suggested reforms that would strengthen commerce while maintaining harmony. Her answers were simple, yet profound. They demonstrated not just intelligence, but empathy, creativity, and an understanding of both human and alien perspectives. The council watched in stunned silence. Some could not hide their admiration, others scowled, feeling the subtle shift of power. The emperor's many eyes narrowed. He realized that this was no ordinary human. She did not need armies, she did not need weapons, yet she commanded attention and respect through intellect and insight alone. As the trial progressed, Lysara subtly revealed inconsistencies in the empire's management. She did not accuse or attack. She asked questions, drew attention to overlooked factors, and suggested improvements. Slowly, the council began to see what she saw: inefficiencies, corruption, and rigid thinking that threatened the empire's stability. By the end of the trial, the hall was filled not with laughter or derision, as the emperor had hoped, but with quiet acknowledgement of her brilliance. In the days that followed, Lysara's influence expanded further. She met privately with generals, learning their concerns and fears, and offering advice that improved operations without undermining authority. Soldiers began to follow her guidance not out of fear, but out of respect for her clarity and fairness. Even advisors who had plotted against her found themselves reevaluating their positions, seeing that she understood problems in ways they could not. The emperor, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. His usual methods, threats, intimidation, and manipulation, were failing. Every move he made to control her influence was anticipated and countered with subtlety. He called his most trusted advisors and generals to discuss the situation. "She moves like a shadow through our halls," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Every plan we set, every strategy we employ is met with a response we did not expect. How can a single human disrupt the work of centuries?" A senior minister spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, it is not disruption in the ordinary sense. She is guiding, not challenging. Her insight and adaptability give her influence. The people trust her, the generals respect her, and even some council members are swayed by her clarity. Humans, it seems, have qualities we did not anticipate." The emperor's mandibles twitched with irritation. He had underestimated the human ability to adapt, to inspire, to act decisively with reason rather than brute force. Lysara had taken a different approach than any enemy he had faced. She did not seek to dominate, she sought to understand. She did not impose, she suggested. And in that simplicity, she gained power. Meanwhile, Lysara continued her careful work. She observed the empire not just through meetings and trials, but by interacting with the citizens and workers who sustained it. She listened to their concerns, understood their routines, and sought ways to improve their lives within the framework of the empire. Small changes, better food distribution, fairer work schedules, and transparent communication earned her loyalty and admiration. She also studied the emperor, not to oppose him outright, but to understand his priorities and weaknesses. She noticed his reliance on fear and strict control, the way he assumed obedience would always follow his command. Lysara understood that challenging the emperor directly would be unwise. Instead, she used strategy, patience, and insight to influence the empire quietly and effectively. One evening, she visited the outer districts, where many citizens had suffered under inefficient administration. She met with local leaders, listened to their grievances, and offered solutions that improved both productivity and morale. Word of her actions spread quickly, reaching even the distant corners of the empire. Citizens began to see a different way of leadership, one based on understanding and respect rather than fear. In the palace, whispers of Lysara's successes reached the emperor. He watched as generals and ministers, once loyal to his authority alone, now sought her advice, consulted her judgment, and even followed her suggestions. Every day, he felt his control slipping, not because of rebellion, but because of admiration for a human who had demonstrated qualities he had not fully understood. The emperor's unease grew into a quiet fear. He had faced invaders, rebels, and assassins, yet none had posed a threat like this. Lysara did not fight with armies, did not manipulate with lies, and did not strike with weapons. She acted with intelligence, insight, and patience. She had proven that humans could not only survive among the stars, but could thrive, influence, and inspire in ways that even the most advanced civilizations could not predict. Despite his growing concern, the emperor could not bring himself to act rashly. Lysara's influence was now deeply rooted among the people and the council. Any direct attack would risk backlash, rebellion, or the loss of loyalty among those who had begun to trust her. He realized that the human princess had mastered a form of power that he had never considered. The ability to lead without demanding control, to inspire without fear, and to guide without imposing. As Lysara walked through the palace gardens one evening, she observed the stars reflected in the pools of water. She reflected on her progress, not with pride, but with awareness. Every move she made, every alliance she fostered, every suggestion she offered, was part of a larger strategy to stabilize the empire and demonstrate the strength of human qualities. Courage, intelligence, creativity, and empathy, these were traits that even the mightiest Zarinthians respected, whether they admitted it or not. Her quiet victories had changed the atmosphere of the palace. Ministers who once whispered behind closed doors now spoke with cautious respect. Generals who once relied solely on orders began to consider her guidance. Citizens felt hope, a rare and precious feeling in a system so long dominated by fear. And the emperor, watching from his throne, could feel the shift, even if he refused to fully acknowledge it. The human princess had not yet acted overtly. She had not seized power, nor had she made demands. Yet her influence was undeniable. By understanding the empire, building alliances, and demonstrating human ingenuity, she had reshaped the way people thought and acted. And in doing so, she had earned a reputation that would not be easily shaken. By the end of Part 3, the stage was set for even greater challenges. The emperor, aware of her growing influence, would be forced to confront the reality that Lysara was not merely a visitor, but a force capable of reshaping the empire itself. The human princess had proven her ability to act with strategy, to inspire loyalty, and to challenge the old ways without striking a single blow. The empire, once rigid and unyielding, now faced the prospect of transformation. Citizens and council members alike wondered what Lysara's next move would be, and even the emperor knew, deep in his instincts, that the human princess was a player unlike any he had faced. She was patient, observant, and brilliant. She had already outmaneuvered many of the empire's most skilled leaders, and the emperor feared that the worst was yet to come. The empire had changed. The grand halls of the palace, once echoing with obedience and fear, now resonated with quiet energy and cautious respect. Whispers of the human princess, Lysara, were on every tongue. Citizens, generals, and ministers alike were aware that her presence had shifted the balance of power. The emperor, Zarinthos III, sat upon his throne with an uneasy stillness, watching the human who had, without weapons or armies, altered the very heart of his empire. He had attempted countless measures to reassert control. Trials, tests, subtle manipulations, each had been countered with intelligence and foresight. His advisors whispered that she might be a danger, yet the emperor knew it was more than that. She was a force of nature, capable of inspiring loyalty and respect in ways no one had anticipated, and he feared the consequences. Lysara, for her part, moved with calm purpose. She did not rush, she did not flaunt her influence. Instead, she focused on what she had always believed, understanding the empire, aiding its people, and demonstrating the value of human creativity, courage, and empathy. Every interaction she had with citizens, soldiers, and council members strengthened her influence and built trust. She did not seek to dominate, she sought to improve, to guide, and to unite. The final test came when the emperor summoned her to the throne hall. The chamber had been prepared for confrontation. Ministers and generals crowded the sides, curious to see if Lysara would finally be forced to reveal weakness or submit. The emperor's eyes glinted with tension. He had decided that today, the human would either bend to his authority or be removed. "Princess Lysara," he said, his voice resonant with command, "your influence grows. Your suggestions have shifted the loyalty of my generals, and even my ministers now seek your counsel. You have demonstrated skill, yes, but the empire is not yours to guide. It is mine. How do you intend to justify this influence over my people?" Lysara stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Your Majesty, I do not seek to take what is yours. I only wish to show that leadership is not defined by fear or force, but by understanding, wisdom, and the ability to inspire others. The empire is strong, but it can be stronger if it values fairness, innovation, and the well-being of its people. My influence comes not from domination, but from offering solutions that serve all." The emperor's mandibles twitched. He had expected defiance, threats, or submission. He had not expected this calm, reasoned answer. He leaned forward, his many eyes focused intently. "And if I refuse to adopt your guidance? If I insist that my authority remain absolute?" Lysara smiled faintly, not with mockery, but with certainty. "Then you risk stagnation, Your Majesty. The empire may continue, but its potential will remain locked. The people will follow what is just and effective, not only what is commanded. Change does not require conquest. It requires insight, courage, and the willingness to act for the greater good." A hush fell over the chamber. For the first time, even the emperor's most loyal ministers felt the weight of her words. They saw the truth. Humanity had qualities the empire often underestimated, and this human princess had demonstrated them fully. The emperor, feeling the unusual stirrings of humility, spoke slowly. "And what of loyalty? How do I know the people will continue to obey me if they see another guiding them?" "Loyalty cannot be demanded," Lysara replied. "It must be earned. It grows when leaders act with wisdom, fairness, and integrity. You can still lead, Your Majesty, but leadership is not diminished by the good counsel of others. It is strengthened." The emperor fell silent. For centuries, he had ruled with certainty. Fear, strategy, and discipline had been his tools. Yet here, faced with a human who commanded respect without force, he realized that the galaxy had more to teach him than he had ever admitted. He had built an empire on obedience, but Lysara had revealed a different path, leadership built on trust, understanding, and inspiration. Over the following weeks, Lysara worked closely with the emperor. She did not dominate decisions, but she provided insight, strategy, and advice. Gradually, the council adopted reforms she suggested. Soldiers began to operate more efficiently, citizens' needs were better addressed, and long-standing disputes were resolved through dialogue rather than intimidation. The empire thrived not because it was forced, but because it had been guided wisely. The emperor observed these changes carefully. His initial fear had not diminished entirely, but it had evolved into respect. He saw how the human princess had brought out the best in those around her, how her calm wisdom encouraged fairness and efficiency. Slowly, he acknowledged that she had shown something he had never expected to find in a human: the ability to inspire greatness, not through power, but through intellect and integrity. In the outer districts, citizens spoke of her as a symbol of hope. Soldiers admired her clarity and decisiveness. Ministers and generals who had once doubted her now sought her advice openly. The empire had changed, and no one doubted that the influence of this human would leave a lasting legacy. Yet Lysara remained humble. She never sought recognition or praise. She moved among the people, listened to concerns, and offered solutions. Her strength lay not in demanding obedience, but in showing the value of thoughtfulness, courage, and empathy. Humans were capable of much more than the galaxy often assumed, and Lysara embodied that potential fully. One evening, the emperor invited her to the palace balcony. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the city. "You have changed much in my empire," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I feared your presence. Now I see that I may have underestimated what humans can accomplish." Lysara looked out over the city, her expression calm. "The galaxy has always underestimated humans," she replied. "We have survived, adapted, and grown even when others doubted us. That is our strength, and we can achieve even more when we act with wisdom, courage, and integrity." The Emperor nodded slowly. He had learned something profound. Strength was not always measured in weapons, armies, or fear. It could also be measured in thought, in strategy, in the ability to inspire others to act for the greater good. Humans had shown him a new way, and this realization both humbled and unsettled him. From that night forward, Lysara continued to guide the Empire alongside the Emperor. She advised, observed, and inspired, never imposing, never threatening, yet her influence grew stronger with every passing day. The council respected her, the citizens admired her, and the Emperor, though cautious, acknowledged her unmatched abilities. In time, the empire became more united, more efficient, and more just. Disputes were resolved through dialogue rather than intimidation. Citizens worked with pride and trust. Generals and ministers operated with both strategy and ethics in mind. And through it all, the human princess remained a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and potential. Even the emperor, who had once feared her next move, came to recognize that her presence had strengthened the empire in ways he could not have achieved alone. Humanity had arrived among the stars not just as survivors, but as leaders, thinkers, and innovators capable of inspiring entire civilizations. Lysara's journey was far from over. She had proven that intelligence, courage, and empathy could reshape empires. She had shown that humans could influence the galaxy not through force alone, but through vision and integrity. And she had revealed to all who would see that even the most powerful ruler could learn, adapt, and grow when guided by wisdom. The stars above the palace shimmered in silent acknowledgement, as if the universe itself recognized the quiet triumph of a human princess. She had arrived with nothing but her mind, her courage, and her people's hopes. Yet in doing so, she had changed an entire empire. And everyone, from the lowliest citizen to the mightiest emperor, understood that humanity had finally earned its place among the stars, not through fear, but through greatness. The human princess looked out over the empire one last time that night. She knew her next move would shape the future, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The empire was stronger, the people were hopeful, and humanity had proven itself capable of more than anyone had imagined. Even the emperor, who had feared her so deeply, now understood that Lysara's strength was not to be resisted, but respected. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Even the emperor feared the human princess's next move.